I am starting already. Now, you are welcome to JCSF Support Foundation. My name is Mr. Gbenga S. Zangonde. I will be tutoring you in biology this afternoon, and I want to welcome everyone, every student, and every learner. I welcome you to today's tutorial. This afternoon, we'll be talking about organization of life. What do we mean by organization of life? When we talk about organization of life, we are talking about how life follows a particular pattern. Now, organization of life, we have to start from the simplest to the most complex. That is, we start from the simple to the complex. Now, in living things, we talk about their complexity. When we talk about the levels of the organization of life. Now, number one, we talk about the cells. Living organisms are divided into 4 levels of organization. The simplest is the cell. Now, what is a cell? A cell is the smallest unit of living organisms. That is, every living organism is composed of a cell or numbers of cells. Okay? Now, the smallest living particle, or we say the smallest unit of a living organism, is the cell. The cell is the simplest. There are some organisms that have just one cell. There are some that have numerous cells, that is plenty cells. Now, when an organism has only one cell, we call it a unicellular organism. We call it a what? A unicellular organism. Meanwhile, when an organism has more than one cells, we call it a multicellular organisms. Now, examples of unicellular organisms that we have, because we have the amoeba, A-M-O-E-B-A, amoeba. Some people call it amoeba, but it is pronounced amoeba. We have the paramecium, we have the euglena, we have the plasmodium, we have the trypanosome, we have the chlamydomonas, and so on and so forth. So also we have some other organisms, that are multicellular. Organisms that are multicellular, that is, a single cell cannot live alone. They live together. So it is when they are together that they function as an organism. They are called multicellular organisms. Of course, we know them. They are organisms that we can see around us: plants, animals, insects, fungi, and so on and so forth. So the simplest unit of a living cell, of a living organism, is the cell. Now, after the cell, we have the tissue. The tissue is a combination of cells, combination of similar cells. When the cells are similar, they combine together to form tissues. Okay? Now, we have examples of tissues. We have the implants. We have tissues in plants. We have tissues in animals. When you have a combination of cells coming together to perform a specific function, we call them tissue. Now, we have the mesophyll in the plants. We have the parenchyma. We have the collenchyma, and so on and so forth in plants. Of course, in animals, we have tissues as well. We have various examples of tissues that we have in animals. We have the muscle. The muscle is a tissue that is muscular tissue. We have the bones, bony tissues. We have the cartilages. Even our blood is an example of tissue. Of course, when we talk about the blood, we have the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelet. The combination of all these cells, when they come together, they form tissue. Now, the third level is organ. Organ. Now, when you have a combination of tissues performing the same function, they come together, perform the same function, they say it is an organ. Examples of organ that we have, of course, if we are asked to list the various examples of organs that we have, we will know them. The eye is an organ, the heart is an organ, the liver is an organ, the kidney is an organ, our skin is an organ. Now, let me just quickly ask this. We have 5 sense organs. When we pick it from there, you will be able to understand what we mean by organs. Now, when tissues performing the same functions come together, it becomes an organ. I mean, they become an organ. Now, when we talk about the sense organs, of course, we have various types of organs. Now, I want to start with the sense organs. We have the eyes, sense of sight. We have the nose, sense of smell. We have the tongue, the sense of taste. We have the skin, the sense of feel. And we have the ear, the sense of hearing, or the auditory sense. Now, when all these tissues are now functioning together as one entity, they become organs. So these organs, they now perform a particular function. Okay? Now, the 4th level of organization is the system. The system. Okay? Now, we have the system. The system is a combination of various organs that perform a particular function. I think you will now see the various level these things work. There is a mnemonic, there's a short form, an acronym that we can use to quickly understand these things. We have the CTOS. CTOS. C for cell, T for tissue, O for organs, and S for system. Now, we are on the system presently. The system performs specific functions in an organism. The system performs a specific function in an organism. For example, we have the respiratory system. Now, let us speak it. Let us start like this. When we say the respiratory system, it is a combination of various other organs. For example, you cannot talk about the respiratory system without talking about your nose or your nostril. You will not talk about the respiratory system without talking about your lungs. Okay, so when you have your lungs and your nostril, okay, and your nasal cavity as well, the pipe that connects your nose to your lungs, all those organs, they are different organs, about 3 organs, and they perform a function of exchange of gases between the organism and the environment. Therefore, it is called the respiratory system. Now, let's take another system. Let's say the digestive system. Of course, when you eat food, you eat your food through your mouth, you chew your food on using your teeth, you roll it using your tongue, and it goes through your esophagus or your gullet into your stomach. A lot of things happen to it in the stomach. Then from there, it goes into the small intestine. Then from the small intestine, it goes into the large intestine. Then from your large intestine, it goes into the rectum. And from your rectum, it goes to the anus. Then it passes out from your body. That is what we call digestion, or the digestive system. Now, we have mentioned various organs responsible under digestive system. We start with the mouth. Inside the mouth, you have your teeth. Your teeth are organs, bony organ. Okay, you have your tongue. Your tongue is another organ. You have your esophagus or your gullet. That's another organ. You have your stomach. Your stomach is another organ. You have your small intestine. Your small intestine is another organ. You have your large intestine. Your large intestine is another organ. You have your rectum, then your anus, before the food actually passes out of your body. So these are the various organs that make up the digestive system. Okay, so also let's pick another example of system. Let's say the excretory system, for example, the excretory system. Of course, when you talk about the excretory system, when you have water, you drink water into your system. Of course, you have your bladder. Your bladder is an organ in the excretory system. Okay, you have your kidney. Your kidney is another organ in the excretory system. Of course, you have your skin as well. Your skin can also help to remove waste products from your body. It's also another example of an organ in the excretory system. So all these organs, when they work together, they become the system. So that is the fourth level of organization. Now, I'm going to quickly recap what I've said. Under the levels of organization of life, we have 4. And I gave it an acronym, CTOS. C for cells, T for tissues, O for organs, and S for systems. Now, that is that. Now, we want to talk about the complexity of organisms. The complexity of the organizations of higher organisms. Complexity of the organization of higher organisms. Now, there is an increase in complexity from unicellular organism to multicellular organisms. That is, when you pick a unicellular organism, let's say amoeba, for example, okay, that is an example of unicellular organism. Of course, you cannot see it with your naked eyes. Now, you pick it, let's say you go to the stream, you pick, you get some sample of water from the stream, you go to your lab, you put a sample of water on your microscope slide, you put it under your microscope and you view. After viewing, you will see it as one single cell. And when you stain, there's something we call staining in biology. When you stain, you will see all the organelles. You see all the organelles in the cell. You see one cell, okay? But when you now move ahead, you move from unicellular, that is one cell organism, to multicellular, many cells organism, there is a complexity. What do I mean by complexity? It becomes somehow hard to identify. That's what we really mean by complexity. It becomes somehow hard to identify. And how do you go about this? Of course, we cannot say because it is hard, we have to stop work. No, we just have to still find a way around it to be able to make sure that we get what we are looking for. Now, we have various advantages. There are various advantages, and of course, there are also disadvantages. Anything that has an advantage must also have a disadvantage. So, various advantages for the complexity. Now, as I was saying, just a unicellular organism will have just one cell. Now, every activity of that organism is carried out by that single cell. The feeding, the movement, the excretion, the regulation of the internal and external environment are being carried out by just one cell. So it is not very hard for the cell to perform. Let's say, for example, we have euglena inside a pond or a water body. Now, if it's going to feed, of course, it has a way of feeding. Now, it takes in water along with the nutrients and it feeds. And if you want to excrete, remove excess metabolic substance from the body, it's also very easy. It's just all the metabolic waste products will move into the contractile vacuole, and before you know it, it squeezes and they move out of the system. Very easy for the organism. But when we start climbing the ladder, start going up the complexity, that is when we start seeing the organisms that are more complex, like the multicellular organisms. For example, human being, goats, sheep, cow, even plants, higher plants, okay, like our monocots and our dicot plants. How do they perform all these activities? That is what we see under complexity. Of course, that's when we now say each of the cell perform the activities, then they move it into the tissue into organs, organs into system. Now, let's see the advantages of complexity of higher organisms. Number one, it leads to cellular differentiation. It can bring about cellular differentiation. Now, what do we mean by cellular differentiation? When cells grow, they tend to differentiate. That is, each of the cells becomes specialized. Now, let's start like this. Before an animal becomes an animal, there must be what we call fertilization. The sperm cell will fertilize the egg. Okay? Now, those two cells become one. That is what we call the zygote. Before you know it, the zygote will start growing, will start dividing. That's what we call cell division. As it starts dividing, it becomes very plenty. Now, after some time, all those cells will now start differentiating. Each of them will start specializing. Those cells that will become the head will go towards the head. Those that will become the tail will go towards the tail. Those that will become the skin, become the skin. Those that will become the eyes, become the eyes. Those that will become the digestive tract, becomes the digestive tract. Those that will become the bones will become the bones. That is what we call differentiation. Each of the cells will have to differentiate. They have to change form to become a particular cell. That's number one. Then number two, we have it leads to internal structure specialization. As I've said earlier, the structures of the internal organs become specialized. For example, the liver, the cells that will become the liver, they specialize and become the liver, and they know their function. A liver cell cannot change back into a brain cell, no. A kidney cell cannot change back into a bone cell, no. The cells that will make the eyes will not change back to become cells that will become the tongue. No. So each of them will have to specialize. Number three, there is mutual interdependence between component cells. That is, each of the cells making up a particular tissue, they depend on one another. They have to depend on one another. That is, all of them, we have to work together. One cannot say, I want to isolate myself, or I don't want to work with you. No, all of them will have to work together and depend on one another. Number four, we have complexity leads to efficiency. That is, the more they become complex, it makes the organism to be more efficient. The cells of the legs will function for the legs, cells of the skin function for the skin, cells of the eyes function for the eyes, and they do their work perfectly. That is another advantage. Now, another one we have here is complexity leads to efficiency. Okay, I've said that. Now, complexity leads to increase in size. That is growth. Unlike the microorganisms, those that are unicellular, they have a particular size they can reach. After they reach that size, the next thing that happens is they burst. That's what we call plasmolysis. They will burst and they die, and that is the end. But for multicellular organisms and higher organisms like higher plants and higher animals, it makes them to grow. Although each of the cells also have their own capacity that they can, the size they can reach. When they reach that size, what happens is they divide and they make that organism to grow, to increase in size. Human beings, you discover when they were born, when you people were born, you were very small, they were carrying you. Then after some time, you start crawling. After some time, you start sitting. After some time, you start standing. After some time, you start walking. Before you know it, you are now old enough to write exams, okay? And you are still growing. So you are growing because the cells of your body are in a complex ratio and they are continually increasing in number. Then lastly, we have, it increases adaptation. Now, the complexity makes the cells to adapt. They adapt, the tissues adapt, the organisms also invariably adapt to cold environments, to hot environments, to acidic environments, to basic environments, and every other environment. So it makes them to what? To adapt. That is another function of complexity. For example, there are some cells that will function properly in a place where there is light. Okay? When you have light, those cells will function properly. But in the dark, they cannot function. But when there is complexity, let's say human beings, for example, you discover that even in the dark, even those cells that cannot function properly in the dark will have to be augmented by those that can function properly in the dark. Why those that can function properly in the light, when they get to the dark places, they have to be augmented by those that can function in the dark. And before you know it, they perform their functions properly. Now, we cannot have an advantage without having the disadvantages. Now, when we talk about the disadvantages of complexity of higher organisms, number one, we talk about inability of individual cells to exist on their own. The cells cannot exist on their own. You know, they have been adapted to function together. They have been specialized, differentiated to function together as one. Now, they will not function individually. So a cell of an higher organism cannot live on its own. As long as it is not part of the cells or of the tissue, it goes off and it dies off. So that is a disadvantage. Unlike for lower organisms, the unicellular organisms, one cell can function alone. There are some that work together, okay? They can work together to form a colony. But when it is just one, the singular one can still function, can still perform all the functions of that organism. I think we understand that. Now, number two, we have difficulties in acquisition of oxygen and food materials. One cell cannot function alone. Therefore, one cell cannot live on its own. It cannot acquire oxygen. It cannot pass out waste on its own. Therefore, it is a disadvantage. It leads to slower rate of diffusion. That is, the diffusion rate becomes very, very slow as it is not functioning together. The cells of that organisms are supposed to be bathed. They're supposed to be immersed in a particular extracellular matrix. But when it is alone, it cannot do that function. Therefore, it has to die. Now, slower rate of expulsion of waste products. Such cells of that organism will have a very difficult session in removing waste from the cell. You know, it's something that's supposed to be done together in a particular environment at a particular condition. But when it is alone, just one, there is no way it can function properly. So at the end of the day, it still has to die off. Then difficulties in reproduction. A single cell cannot reproduce. Of course, single cells, if it is a unicellular, they reproduce properly. But when it is a cell of a multicellular organism, they cannot reproduce. There is no way they will reproduce, because these functions has to be done together along with other cells of the organism. Then number five, we have difficulties in reproduction. I've said that. Number six, we have decrease in ability to regenerate. They will not be able to regenerate. They cannot reproduce. They cannot regenerate on their own. As long as it is out of the system, it goes off and dies. It cannot be resuscitated. Although it is a difficulty though. These things are very possible in the lab, but ethically, it has not been proven. And ethically, it has not been allowed, because we can take one cell, just a single cell of an higher organism, take it to the lab, and we do what we call tissue culture. We can culture it such a way that we just, let's say a cell of the skin can be taken to the lab to culture and bring up more skin. Of course, that is possible, but it is very expensive to do. Okay, that is that. I hope you enjoy this class. Now, before I close the class, I want us to quickly go back to what we have said. Now, think we are together. Organization of life. Said organization of life is in four levels. We have first level, second level, third level, and the fourth level. The first level are the cells, second level are the tissues, the third level are the organs, and the fourth level are the system. So the smallest unit of a living organism is the cell, and that's the first level. Then from the first level, you have the second level, which is the tissue. The tissues are combinations of cells working together to perform a particular function. That is the second level. Then the third level, we have the organs. Of course, organs, they are a group of similar tissues that come together to form a layer of an organism. For example, you talk about the eyes is an organ, talk about the kidney is an organ, the brain is an organ, the heart is an organ, the stomach is an organ, and so on and so forth. Then the last level, which is the fourth level, is a system. Combinations of various organs that perform a specific function is regarded as a system. For example, we have the circulatory system, we have the respiratory system, we have the excretory system, we have the digestive system, we have the nervous system, and so on and so forth. Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions?
Any question? Okay.
Zeno, Joshua, you have questions?
Who is asking me questions? Zainab. Okay. Hello? Is anybody asking question?
No.
Hello?
No.
Okay.
No.
I can hear you if you have your question.
No, I don't have any question.
Okay. Do you understand the class?
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Are we still here together? Anyone else with question? Please
Joshua,
ask your questions.
the tutor has been asking questions. Why you silent?
You said? Did you say something?
Yes, I was referring to Joshua. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it seems we don't have questions. Okay, I think Zeno was saying something.
Okay, she said she doesn't have any question.
Okay. All right then.
Okay.
The class anyway.
Well, I just don't know. It seems the network is not very fine. I just hope there was no hitch in the video.
Hopefully there won't be.
Hello?
Hopefully there won't be.
Okay.
Okay. When it's ready, I will send it across.
I can hear you well.